We are joined in studio by Killian Woods, Senior Business Reporter with the Business Post. Killian, you do an awful lot of housing reporting for the Business Post, and housing is a theme that we find ourselves very hard to get away from on the group chat, because we always get messages from listeners or followers or people who are just complaining about the state of the market. And I'm going to ask you a very open-ended, kind of cerebral question, which is, do you get the same impression from talking to investors, constructors, government side? Do you get the same sort of disheartening impression that the whole system is banjaxed and it's basically beyond ever fixing?
Do you know, no, I don't. I think there's a lot of optimism on their side that they've got this cracked, and we're just a few months away from it all slotting into place, and which is tough to take after.
They think that genuinely, that they don't think that is just an empty line that they have to say to convince people that they're in charge,
or maybe convincing themselves that they're in charge of the situation. You know, like, you kind of have to back yourself that you've kind of got this under control, or this next plan, or this next housing estate, or this next policy is going to sort it out. I suppose you'd say the same for the government approach to it, and that they are kind of hoping that there's no silver bullet, but the next one will be the final bullet in the chamber that they need to actually solve it all. That's what it feels like. But I'd say there's an overall optimism from the industry side that they're going in the right direction, or that they can address it. Yeah. Which, you know, a lot of people will be skeptical of.
Well, I was going to say that people will find that so difficult to believe, that the industry genuinely does believe that it's always on the precipice of turning a corner. Like, so what gives them rise to think that they are about to fix stuff, or that they can materially make an impact?
Well, maybe there's a bit of we need to separate the two things out, in that the industry isn't necessarily looking to solve the affordability problem. The industry is looking to bring to the market products that it can sell to people who can afford their product. So I think that's what we have in Ireland a lot of at the moment. Is we don't really have, we have the Land Development Agency and some government initiatives that are trying to build affordable housing, but there's no industry, there's no private investor. That's not affordable, isn't in the back of their mind about what they can bring to the market. They see an acute shortage, and when there's an acute shortage of any product, there's a prime opportunity to charge what a higher than what the price that people can actually should pay for.
So not to be callous, but it's just the straightforward truth of when you leave things to the private sector is they're going to charge as much as they can for it, and they know there's a market out there, so they're going to do it.
This is business, right? Like, that's just what, and we shouldn't really expect anything different of them, which is why some of the criticism of the government would go to, if you leave it to the private sector to solve a problem like the housing crisis, well, naturally then it's going to be a private solution to a public problem. Yeah. And the private solution isn't going to be that we need to build affordable housing, because we've got, like, they're competing, let's say, for, when you think of housing there, where you said it always comes up, it's the fundamental, like, cornerstone of, like, cost of living issues. Yeah. That's likely the most expensive thing most people spend in a given month, in a given year. Like, not maybe your rent, but a lot of people wouldn't spend that much on one product in one go in a year, like maybe spending $1,400 to $2,000 a month. So I think when you ask the private market then to come into this, they're going to try and get the most value they can out of you for that, rather than they're not thinking about, well, like maybe the government would be approaching it, that we need to have property be a fair price so that people have the money to go out to a restaurant, they have money to spend in shops. Probably they're all in on that, investors, and there's some investors who are in on maybe retail and also housing and different, like, diverse portfolios. But a lot of what we're seeing coming in now is just pension funds and investment funds coming in to make returns to their investors at any cost. They don't care if people have money to go out in the evening, or they just want to maximize their profits or the amount of money they can make from property.
Which makes sense when you hear it said out loud, but it's not something which is said out loud very much. And that's probably then why, because I know you reported in last weekend's Business Post about advice that had been given by a German institutional landlord. So people know of Hibernia or IRES, there's two of the biggest landlords. People might not know the names of the other ones, but there was one hedge fund or one investor called Patrizia, a large landlord. And you reported last weekend about some of the stuff that they were saying about the cost of living in Dublin, which seemed callous, but which actually, when you take on board the very narrow role of an institutional landlord, makes an awful lot of sense.
Yeah, so Patrizia would be like, there's lots of different kind of scales of maybe investment funds that come into Ireland. There's the Vulture Fund, maybe the most popular moniker people would know, then Cuckoo Fund, who buy homes and be just ahead of buyers. This would be, in fairness to them, they would be putting the money up to build apartments that wouldn't be built if they didn't come in with their money. So they're making they're making the building happen. So we can, like, there's different scales of investment funds that people have their issues with. So they are putting the money into it that builds an apartment project that then brings to market. Now they come to market like 2.5 to 4,000 per month. They're not for, again, they're not for everybody, or they're not for the entire market, the affordable market. But it was interesting to see, they did a little report on Dublin. It's hard to know who it was pitched at. Like at first I thought it was a pitch to investors, it was a pitch to people looking to live in Dublin, but it was kind of a rundown of like how much coffee costs in Dublin, what the transport is like. But some of the language was so, it was callous, but you can't fault them for being inaccurate. Like I took down like the opening line of it is just, I read that and I thought this is just bonkers.
The opening line of this advice from Patrizia.
What is the best way for a citizen of Dublin to lower their cost of living? Move to virtually any other city in the European Union. And like
that's supposed to be the showcase. No, but move to Dublin. So it's dearer than everywhere.
I don't know who you pitch it. Is this to an investor to say, oh, look, this is the market you need to be involved in? Because part of the other parts of the report said, there's a shortage of rental stock, meaning there will always be a demand, or there'll be a demand beyond some of our people's lifetimes at the moment. So I'm not sure who they're pitching it to, but it was just in stark words. Like they're saying, looking at social media, buses are outdated, outmoded, and just not fit for purpose. And that was about the transport. Then they said there was just, if you want to get, Dublin was a capital of heritage and hedonism, but it'll set you, hedonism.
Okay.
So many different meanings of hedonism. So I'm sure they're good. But there's the one more popular one. Then there's the more general, like low-key definition of hedonism that isn't what past watershed. But that will set you back like 500,000. Like that. Then they say it's a capital of heritage and hedonism, but it'll set you back 500,000 euro to buy a home, to live in Dublin for this, and that's only accessible to certain people.
But there is a weird disconnect when the people that are saying, "Oh, this place is dear, nothing you can do about it," like cost of living is mad, and yet they are also people who are kind of in their own way directly responsible for setting the high price of living.
Yes, I don't know how to feel about it. I think you can't fault the accuracy, I think, of what they're saying, and they cite their sources, and they say, look, if you look at the World Bank and you look at all these different, like Mercer and all these different things about Dublin, it ranks here in cost of living, it ranks here for property and prices. So you can't fault them for it's accurate. It's an accurate report of Dublin. It's just rare you see, like maybe even mask is slipping is the wrong word to use here, but for them to be so blatantly blunt about this is what Dublin is like, and this is what people need to know about Dublin, because a lot of the different narrative would be that we're not expensive. This is what the price property should be, and apartments need to cost this much because we bring you a lot of other services around it, like you get a gym and you get like a community space and you get like a co-working space. So to hear them say just Dublin is too expensive and you should just leave if you don't like it or you can't afford it. Yeah. But I don't know where that fits in with where we're going with Dublin or Irish cities in general, because if we're pricing out at that level, and that's what the new rate is going to be for rentals.
That's the new normal forever.
Like I was at a property conference a few years ago, and someone asked a question quite bluntly to a developer, I won't name and shame, but they were saying, like, where do you say in the bottom floor there's retail of this apartment block you're building? He said yes, and there's going to be a deli there, like in that shop. I was like, yeah. Where's the person making the sandwiches going to live if you're charging €3,500 for a one bed? And they said in the social housing. So it's kind of also, we were approaching it like that the service workers then just go into social housing because that's where and then those service workers have to work in the deli. But we're approaching kind of housing in a weird way at the moment where, and this is again, back to it, the private approach to a public problem. Yeah. They just see it's like, no, we just want to get tech workers in. But if they have nowhere to put like their children for schools, where there's no teachers to teach their kids in schools, like we see Google now is gone, it's getting the apartments they own in Grand Canal and they're going to give them to an approved housing body to give out for cost rentals. So, and they want guards and teachers to move in. It's not as simple as that. You can't just, give them to guards and teachers. But, that's the mess we're in at the moment.
Which kind of then leads us to an interesting final question, which is that if we even did have all the staff or all the money to build all the properties that we needed and all the land, that where would the builders themselves live in the meantime? That's
the biggest acute shortage. That's the main thing that will stop us from getting up to whether you want the numbers. The government say 33,000 on average a year for the next 10 years, or it's 50,000 a year going forward, or 60,000 is the highest rate, the highest number I've seen. But, we can just keep naming numbers if you want. Yeah. But that is pretty much the problem. We don't have the workers to scale up to that, and it'll take years. And I know Simon Harris is putting in place a lot of apprenticeship programs to try and boost the numbers, but that's that's very early days and early doors of getting people in. And then where do they live exactly?
And where do they live?